Camp of the Saints by Jean Raspail. A rather thorny book, you might say. So I don't really know all that much about Jean Raspail. He was a French writer in the 20th century. I believe this is his most well-known work. It was published, I think, in 1973 or thereabouts, and it is a novel which depicts the demise of Europe due to mass immigration. Written over 50 years ago, but might as well be ripped right out of today's headlines. This book was and is a pretty controversial work due to its unapologetically racist sentiments. At present, I don't think there are any English translations in print for sale. I had to read the book via a PDF file, which I found online, in which I will, if I can, link in the description box so that you yourself can read this book if you would so like. But though this book may be unpleasant, it is also undeniably prophetic. And as per usual, I'm going to give you the lowdown on it. So what is the story of the Camp of the Saints? Well, it takes place in, I don't know exactly when. It feels oddly timeless. There really aren't that many references to technology. So it could transpire, I guess, contemporaneously with when it was written in the early 70s. Or it could transpire now, I suppose. Actually, it feels like it is transpiring now, again, judging by some of those headlines. But it takes place sometime when in India, a guru, I guess you might say, the leader of some kind of movement, convinces the squalid masses of native Indians to rise up and betake themselves to Europe, to the West, to the land of milk and honey. So these ragged masses rise up and commandeer a lot of European ships and then set sail for Europe. And the bulk of the story is concerned with the reactions of the various nations of Europe, in particular France, to the impending arrival of this fleet of ships bearing a sizable portion of the third world to their shores, and the ultimate collapse of Western civilization when the two worlds collide. So that's kind of a broad overview of the story. So let's talk about the technical qualities of the story now. So the writing in this book is good. I think Jean Raspail was actually a pretty solid writer. It's written very sardonically. There's kind of elements of black humor in it at times, and it feels very, very snarky in tone. But really, there are some pretty nice turns of phrase in this. And honestly, I just don't really have much, if anything, to complain about with the writing. Overall, I think it's a pretty well-written book on a prose level. But the characters are a different matter. The Camp of the Saints has no central character. It instead has a rather broad cast of characters, which it kind of cycles through as its story unfolds. It's very panoramic in its scope. It's like extreme omniscient perspective. So if you don't like that kind of extreme omniscience in the perspective of the book, you might not like this book because it's kind of like that to the max. And the characters are flat and depthless, although they're written with the intent of highlighting the various foibles of society. I don't want to say that this book is written as satire because I don't think that it qualifies, but it's written with the intent of these characters being kind of representative of the various strata of society which they come from. They include politicians, military personnel, journalists, lay people, etc. But like I said, they're very flat and lack depth. And so emotionally, there's not much to invest in here. So the character work is a major knock against it, I would say. But now let's talk about like the actual story of the book. It is interesting. And though it may be sad to say, It is also quite astute in some of the observations that it makes about society and the people who populate society, and it rings kind of dismally true to life with some of the things that we see in our world today. Of course, I'm talking about the kind of ivory tower intellectuals, the champagne socialist types who champion this mass flood of immigrants to Europe, and kind of champion equality and multiculturalism until it gets to their doorstep, at which point they then have qualms with it. And also the kind of devious personages that encourage this immigration with the express intent of destroying Europe, the West. And also, he even manages to depict a kind of bleeding heart anti Western Pope who basically sells the Catholic Church in favor of the immigrants. Pope Francis, is that you? Yeah, this book, again, even though it may be sad to say, it's kind of on point with a lot of the observations which it makes about society and the various personalities at play within society. And again, a lot of it rings very true to certain things that we see in our world today. So the story is interesting, and it kept me hooked. And I guess it's well plotted, so it's not the worst thing I have ever read in a literary sense, anyway. It's really not. It is actually a book which has some real merits, although it also has a lot to it which many will find objectionable. But now that I've kind of discussed the literary aspects of the book, let's talk about the book's heart, what the book really says. Because even though this book has the potential to be grossly offensive, I cannot in good conscience discount the book's prescience, because this book is prescient. It may be one of the most prescient things I have ever read. We are seeing now in our world the playing out of things which this book dealt with fictionally over 50 years ago. So I got to give credit where it's due. And I think that by now, the effects of rampant mass immigration have been pretty conclusively proven to be nothing short of calamitous. And what the governments of many of the nations of Europe have done to their countries, hell, what the Biden administration just spent the past few years attempting to do here in America, all in the name of their nationless, borderless, globalist God, is not something which can be safely ignored or gone along with. To do so is to do so at our own peril, not necessarily because of any genetic superiority, but rather because of the incompatibility of cultural mores. For the record, I am not a proponent of cultural relativism, and the creation of a volatile milieu through the misguided attempt at integration between peoples of less advanced cultures and the more enlightened West, when the former have no intent of adopting or even respecting the values of the latter, is a very serious threat, I believe. And I think that by now the question could be posed, and should be posed: how many acid-scarred women, how many children sold into sex trafficking, how many stabbings, bombings, and vehicular homicides does it take before people are forced to admit that perhaps diversity is not quite the strength that a lot of people like to tout it as? But this book, once again, is one which will certainly ruffle a lot of people's feathers, but it makes no bones about it. It is nakedly, unabashedly racist. But once again, so much of it sadly has come to pass. And so I think, once again, credit where it's due, the book is sadly a valuable work, honestly, and one that has some great pertinence to our world of today. So to rate The Camp of the Saints by Jean Raspail, I'm going to give this book a B minus. Uh, it's it's a book that has merits and demerits. The writing, I think, is pretty good. Honestly, it's a pretty solidly written book. I think the characters suck, but the story is fascinating and again prescient and makes a lot of astute observations. I think, though it's maybe sad to say. So overall, for me, this book gets a B minus. Although once again, I would emphasize that this is a book that many people will not um, uh, enjoy. This is not a read for everybody. This definitely, once again, will ruffle feathers and offend sensibilities. But objectively, I think it's at a B minus level. Um, uh, and once again, if I can, I will link in the description box the link to where I read it so that you may read it yourself if you would like. So yeah, The Camp of the Saints by Jean Raspail. Have you read The Camp of the Saints? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said here today. And if you haven't read The Camp of the Saints, I would actually recommend reading this because I think it, as I said, it has great bearing on our world of today, especially if you're a European out there. This book was ahead of the curve, you might say, in certain respects. So I definitely could recommend reading this, even though, once again, many people will find this highly unpleasant and objectionable. But as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.